Non-stop local news for Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. This is News Channel 8.
Good afternoon, I'm Jeff Goldberg. It is Sunday, November 23rd. Coming up.
He had a driver, and he was getting out of the automobile, and he was, walking towards the door, and from what I'm told, he just kind of collapsed.
And was non-responsive?
And was non-responsive. At that point, we were contacted. Mrs. Berry ran over to the house. She was there with him as he was taken by ambulance to United Medical Center.
And of course, today we are following the huge news. Mayor Marion Berry, mayor for life as he was known, dying overnight at the age of 78 years old, also the D.C. council member. Just an incredible life. We're going to take a long look at the look back on the legacy of Marion Berry and also speak with those who knew him and worked with him just to get their thoughts on this very sad day for the District of Columbia. His family saying in a statement that Berry died shortly after midnight at the United Medical Center in Southeast Washington, of course, Southeast Ward 8, where Marion Berry's home and where he was so well known for so many years. Diane Cho right now is live in Northwest D.C. at the Marriott Wardman Park Hotel. And Diane, I know you're at an event with many city leaders, a pre-planned event, and I'm sure all anybody is talking about is Marion Berry.
It certainly is, Jeff, and it'll certainly be what everybody is talking about today throughout the district. And as you can imagine, many throughout the area mourning the loss of the former mayor today. We've seen at least one fire station in the district this morning as we were driving around with their flags at half staff today. We are at the Washington Marriott Wardman Park Hotel here in Northwest D.C. this morning, where many D.C. politicians are gathering this morning for a pre-scheduled event to talk about economic development in the Anacostia area, a meeting Berry likely would have attended as the council member for D.C.'s 8th Ward. Today, many are speaking about his life and his legacy at this event. Berry, of course, dedicated 4 decades of his life to public service, starting his D.C. political career in the early 70s, first serving as a member of the school board. He has faced several health issues over the years, including diabetes, prostate cancer, and 2 lengthy hospital stays earlier this year due to a serious blood infection. His spokesperson told us this past week that he was admitted to Howard University Hospital last Thursday because he wasn't feeling well and was released on Saturday. Of course, he died hours later. We talked to several people throughout the D.C. community today who were still shocked over his death. Many of them remembered him as a man who was always fighting for the people, a motto in which he lived by. They also told us they remembered him for the work that he did in the late 70s when he created the district's Youth Employment Act of 1979, guaranteeing summer jobs to teens who lived in the district regardless of their economic status. Despite his personal struggles over the years, many told us they felt that shouldn't overshadow his accomplishments throughout his career.
It's a sad day because I can recall, as we were coming up as kids, him providing jobs and things like that for the kids. And actually, my cousin, he was on that. He got into that program. And to this day, he's still working with the federal government.
He represented a voice that I don't think many people felt was getting a fair, was being heard. He connected well with regular folk.
I like for him to remember for the impact he made on this city and the legacy that lives in those young people that he's impacted.
And Mayor Gray is the keynote speaker at this event, so we are hoping to catch up with him here shortly. Many told us that they liked him because they felt like he was one of them and that you could talk to him at any event or throughout the community. If you saw him anywhere in public, you could feel comfortable enough to approach him and just have an everyday conversation with him. Of course, we'll continue to stay on top of this developing story for you throughout the day. We'll have much more for you coming up tonight, starting at 5 o'clock. Reporting live from Northwest D.C., I'm Diane Cho for News Channel 8.
Thanks, Diane. As Diane mentioned earlier in her report, the mayor of D.C., Vincent Gray, ordering that all flags be flown at half-staff in honor of the passing of Marion Berry. We want to continue our team coverage, of course, on this big story with a look back at his life and tremendous legacy. Our D.C. Bureau Chief Sam Ford has known Berry for a number of years and covered him very closely. Sam now with this look back.
We're outside Union Temple Baptist Church, which Marion Barry often attended, where he was fondly remembered this morning. We caught up to Barry's press secretary, LaToya Foster, who had put out a press statement last night saying that Barry got out of Howard University Hospital at 6:30. He was doing well. She said he went out to dinner with his driver, that the driver took him home, and at that point something happened.
He had a driver, and he was getting out of the automobile, and he was, walking towards the door, and from what I'm told, he just kind of collapsed.
And was non-responsive?
And was non-responsive. At that point, we were contacted. Mrs. Berry ran over to the house. She was there with him as he was taken by ambulance to United Medical Center.
Barry was pronounced dead at 1:46 this morning at United Medical Center. The Reverend Willie Wilson was with him at the time. Reverend Wilson poured a libation in African ceremony in honor of Marion Barry during church services this morning. We're told that Barry's widow, Cora Barry, called Reverend Wilson around midnight last night. Parishioners at Union Temple, where Barry was once a member, said he was a good man who helped many people. Of course, Barry was a major figure in D.C. politics. He arrived in the city during the Civil Rights Movement. After the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968 and the massive riots in Washington, Barry emerged here as a high-profile community activist running a black self-help group called Pride Incorporated. From there, he was elected to a less than satisfying school board post.
Because they're reactionary, and you have to just try to figure out how you get some power in this town.
Barry was next elected to city council, and an incident in 1977 rocketed him to prominence. A radical group called the Hanafi Muslims took over the district building, D.C. City Hall, and in the chaos they shot then at-large council member Marion Barry and news reporter Maurice Williams, who was killed. The city negotiated an end to the takeovers, and Barry survived.
Well, I wish it hadn't rained on our parade, but on the other hand, that's a good luck.
The following year, Barry was elected mayor of Washington, D.C. The early Barry years were marked as a time of progress for D.C. black business that saw its share of city contracts soar from single digits to more than a third. He guaranteed all D.C. youths who wanted them summer jobs. But by Barry's third term, his administration suffered from daily news stories about his rumored drug use. Then in January 1990, in a video seen round the world, Barry smoked crack cocaine in an FBI sting where they used an old girlfriend, Rashida Moore, and arrested the mayor on drug charges. The next day, a wild scene in front of U.S. District Court as the mayor of the nation's capital, his wife Effie at his side, arrived for arraignment on misdemeanor charges of possession of crack cocaine. After a 4-month prison sentence, Barry was back in D.C. politics. In '94, re-elected mayor, but the city was in financial chaos. The feds put a control board in charge, and Barry was but a figurehead. He eventually returned to the council representing Ward 8, the city's poorest, but dogged by new scandals involving drugs or women or money, he never regained his original prominence, though for many he would always be D.C.'s mayor for life. Also, Reverend Wilson announced today from the pulpit that a viewing party that they were planning to have with Marion Barry as they watched this major interview that Oprah Winfrey did with him on her network to air tonight at 9 o'clock. It was going to take place down the street at the Union Town Cafe. Reverend Wilson says it will take place as scheduled. Also, Marion Barry's annual turkey giveaway here at Union Temple Baptist Church will also take place, he said, this Tuesday. They will be giving away 3,000 turkeys. It was something dear to Marion Barry's heart. Reporting from Southeast Washington, Sam Ford, News Channel 8.
Joined now with Bruce DuPoit from News Talk. And Bruce, watching Sam's retrospective, reading the obituaries this morning, it's just unbelievable what an incredible life this man led. Just unbelievable. I know you've obviously covered city politics for years. Your thoughts?
We're incredibly blessed to have someone with Sam Ford's knowledge now, because this is one of those moments that even as we're in it, you can't believe it's actually happened. Yeah. Everyone who knew and covered Councilman and Mayor Marion Barry thought he would live us. We thought that he would outlive us all.
Right, right.
He was an amazing figure, a one-of-a-kind figure. In the news business, we use the phrase "the end of an era" too often.
Sure.
This is the end of an era. There will never be another Marion Barry. What he did to empower people who had been left out in employment, in contracting, in access to the doors to power. He's a historic figure by any yardstick. He battled incredible public demons publicly, and so he walked that incredible path of being beloved by many and reviled by many. D.C. was the butt of national jokes because Marion Barry was able to go from power to prison to power again. So we're just never going to see a person like Marion Barry ever again.
We're going to get to some people who knew Marion Barry very, very well. Bruce, I want to ask you one more question before we move on to speaking to others. You sit in this chair and you interview politicians all the time, and I'm sure that there are some that are giving you more straight answers than others. Let's just call it that way. Did you find that that Marion Barry was always being straight up with you? That was my sense, that this was he would say what was on his mind.
He did. He was Marion Barry was in the Marion Barry business first and foremost, and that was in part because of ego, but in part because he knew he was in a special place to get things done for people that he really cared about. He dedicated his life to public service. Going to church this morning, my phone blowing up all day. The thing that comes through is what it meant to real people to have a job, to get a job from the summer jobs program. That impacted thousands and thousands of people, and by extension, relatives and family members. How many of us can say that we had that sort of impact on real people in a real way? So sure, he was in the Marion Barry business, and you asked him a question about one thing, and the conversation would shift very quickly to him. But you knew that going in. He was just an ultimate character, and I suspect the next person we're going to talk to may have had a summer job from the D.C. government herself. I'm not sure.
Good segue, Bruce. We are fortunate now to be joined by Mayor-elect of the District of Columbia, Muriel Bowser. Ms. Bowser, first off, thank you very much for joining us today on a truly emotional day in D.C. Can you tell us, first off, just your thoughts on this day, Ms. Bowser?
Well, I am, of course, I know I speak for a lot of Washingtonians in saying how sad we are to lose Marion, but also I've been very honored and blessed to have known him and what he has meant to this city.
Ms. Bowser, what, in terms of his leadership, personally, as you are now about to take on this big challenge of becoming mayor of D.C., what, in terms of his leadership, any notes you took, and in any way, any sort of mentoring that he gave to you that maybe you were going to be carrying into the future on your next challenge?
Well, absolutely. I think Marion was a fighter for people. He was a leader, but he was also a teacher. He was the mayor of our great city for 4 terms. There only have been 7 elected mayors. I'll be the 8th. And he did make it his business to share his ideas about anything, big or small, about what it was like to sit in the mayor's seat. And like a lot of great executives, Marion had a great memory, a great mind for budget and numbers and how this government works.
Yeah. Mayor-elect Bowser, thank you very much for being with us here today. It was remarkable, to say the least, that Marion Barry was able to go from power to prison to power. He came back first through the council and then became mayor in 1994, serving a single term. That was a head-scratcher for many, but I think a lot of people looked at that ultimate comeback, if you will, and thought, you know what, if he can do it, I can do it. Is that
Absolutely.
a proper reading from your perspective? And if you buy into that narrative, could you expand on it, please?
Well, D.C. is a city of generous people and people who believe in second chances and are willing to allow somebody who paid their debts and are ready to roll up their sleeves and work for the city to do exactly that. And so we are a city where that we embrace people and give second chances. But we're also a city looking toward the future. And one thing I've learned in the last 20 months going all over the city is that Marion cultivated a lot of friends, and people knew him. In all of the district's 8 wards as a fighter. Love him or hate him or, forgive him for his transgressions. People knew that he cared about the District of Columbia first and foremost.
Mayor-elect Muriel Bowser. Ms. Bowser, thank you very much for your time and for sharing your thoughts on this very emotional and certainly memorable day in D.C. As we mourn the passing of Marion Barry. Thank you very much, Ms. Bowser.
Mayor-elect Bowser, thank you very much. Let's talk now with Harry Jaffe, editor-at-large at Washingtonian and, of course, co-editor with Tom Sherwood of the ultimate book on the District of Columbia and on the Barry years in office, Dream City. Harry Jaffe, thanks for your patience. Thanks for calling in.
I'm happy to be here with you, but it is definitely a sad day. It's very emotional for me. I was not always a fan of Marion Barry's, but as a follower of his ups and downs, I truly will miss him on the stage.
You guys, there aren't many books that are read as enthusiastically as Dream City is 20 years after their publication, because you guys had one of the ultimate American stories to try to describe, and you did a darn good job doing it. Can you reflect, to the extent that we can do this justice in a few seconds, reflect on Marion Barry, the person and the political animal?
Well, I appreciate your talking about Dream City. He truly was one of a kind. You can't forget about the fact that this is a man who came from, a sharecropper's son in Itabena. He was, first of all, extremely smart. He graduated from college. He was getting his master's degree in chemistry when he got involved with the civil rights movement. He also had an uncanny ability to assess political situations and then to use people for his political benefit. And the third thing about Marion Barry is that he, every politician creates a kind of a view of him or herself. And that's what they try to kind of foist on the rest of us. Marion Barry's view of himself was, I am the best man to run this city. I'm the best leader. And that's how I'm going to live my life, and I'm going to prove it to you all. And he proved it to enough people in this city over and over again to stay in political power.
Mr. Jaffe, one more question for you before we let you go, sir. I know in the writing of Dream City, how many hours I'm sure you must have spent with Marion Barry, not only watching him in public, but some private moments as well. Any reflections you have of things that you saw of Marion Barry that maybe the general public didn't see, that maybe surprised you perhaps, or touched you in a certain way that maybe the general public didn't get a sense of from this very public man?
Sure. The fact is, Sherwood and I didn't really speak to Marion very much during the writing of the book. But I will tell you this. I was in the district building a few years ago, and I was at one end of the building, one end of the 5th floor, and I saw this gentleman, old gentleman, get off of the elevator on the other side, walking with a cane, clearly not doing well, his skinny legs kind of rattling around in his pants. He slowly got to the door of the city council chambers, and I saw that it was Marion, and I opened the door for him, said, "Hello, Mr. Mayor." And Marion didn't like me very much because she thought I was the bad and the worst of the two of us. Then Marion Barry walked in, shoulders back, got up on the dais, and for the next 2 hours, he schooled the other city council members and everybody in the chamber about the budget, about the city's history, various particular programs that were being discussed that day, which only proved once again to me that he confounded his critics. He beat back, overcame many physical disabilities, and surprised people. So he will always be hugely polarizing. White people will see him as a buffoon and a corrupt guy. Black people will see him as somebody who represented their interests and who they could relate to. Every which way.
And I know he had a very complicated relationship with the press generally, and with you and Tom in particular. I long suspected, Harry, that Councilman Barry was the source of many of Tom's best scoops, and Tom has had many scoops over the years. If any of that is true, it would certainly confirm this notion of him as the ultimate complicated politician.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Tom should speak to this himself, but sure. They were kind of like two Southern guys. And they had an understanding and a relationship that transcended, the politics and the news of it all. I think that they were extremely close, and they just understood one another. And I was a bystander in that relationship, and I always appreciated it.
Mr. Jaffe, thank you very much for your time. Harry Jaffe, Washingtonian editor-at-large. We appreciate your time, sir. We're going to go now back to Northwest Washington, where Diane Cho is interviewing Mayor Vincent Gray live. Out to you, Diane.
Man asked him another question. He answered that, and then he asked him another question. And Marion said to him, I was sitting right there when he said, you know what, you don't want any answers, do you? He said, if you want to know how we can make this work, I'll stay here and work with you all night. But if you want to stop this, I have no more to say to you. It took a lot of guts.
Mayor, we're going live now on Channel 8. Your reaction to learning that former Mayor Berry died?
I was absolutely stunned, Sam. I just couldn't believe it. That doesn't mean at an intellectual level I, didn't know that Marion was ill and that he had, bounced with illness that put him in harm's way in the last 2 or 3 years. But I was one of those, and I'm not alone, who believed that whatever the adversity was, Marion Berry would overcome it.
And obviously this time he did not.
He did not. And, it's my understanding that, he was released from the hospital yesterday. And that he, was on the phone with several people, and when he went home, it's my understanding he collapsed in front of his home, and all efforts to resuscitate him failed. And it's just hard to swallow.
He leaves quite a legacy here.
He leaves a tremendous legacy. He leaves a legacy of, supporting those who oftentimes had no one fighting for them. It's frankly one of the reasons why Marion and I connected and, we're friends and work so closely together, because that's pretty much what I've spent my life doing also, and that is working on behalf of people who really didn't have oftentimes all the support and all the tools to be able to support themselves. And that's what he did.
Summer jobs was one of his biggest legacies?
Absolutely. We had the 35th year celebrating the Summer Youth program here in the District of Columbia. And even as mayor, I took great pride in going to meetings with other mayors. They would ask me to serve on panels. I served on a panel about the Summer Youth Employment Program, where there were other cities saying, well, we've increased the number of kids that we're funding for summer jobs from 50 to 75, or from 70 to 100. And I would say, we serve every young person who wants a job between ages 14 and 21. And that's the legacy of Marion Berry. He was the one that had the vision for that. The Reeves Center is a tremendous commitment and investment that he made in lifting up an area that people had written off as helpless and hopeless. He was just a fighter. He had the ability, he was so smart. He had the ability to see things that other people didn't, and he had the resolve to go fight for them.
Thank you, Mayor Gray. Thank you so much. Back to you at Channel 8. This is Sam Ford here. We're at an event at the Awardment Park, and the mayor's about to speak. And we just wanted to get his words to you. He was stunned, as basically was everybody else. Reporting live from Northwest Washington, Sam Ford, News, Channel 8. Back to you.
And Sam Ford speaking, of course, with Mayor Vince Gray, who has said that Marion Berry was not only a friend, but also a mentor. And I'm sure that there are so many politicians throughout the city who do consider Marion Berry a mentor. We're going to bring on the phone now Jack Evans, a member of the D.C. City Council. And Mr. Evans, first off, thank you for joining us. I was thinking as you were listening to Harry Jaffe talk about Mayor Berry and how he conducted himself with city government, with city council members, and in those meetings. First of all, your thoughts on this very sad day in D.C. history, but also add, I guess, if you could, what Mr. Jaffe was saying about working with Marion Berry.
Well, I've known Marion Berry 35 years, so I'm tremendously saddened to hear of his passing. I just spoke to him on Friday. I had a committee markup with call him to see if he get by. He was in the hospital. He sounded great, so I'm very sad. He's in the office next to me, has been for years, and so we have had a great relationship over the years, discussing things, and I think he'll be remembered most, for his dedication to the people in need in this city and just to the city itself. We used to laugh that he and I are the institutional knowledge of the government, been here so long. So I've lost a very close friend to whom we shared a lot of stories, and I remember traveling the world with Marion Berry. We were in South Africa and in Senegal, in China. Everywhere we went, people would come out of their houses to see Marion Barry, all across this country. So he was a phenomenon, a larger-than-life figure, a larger-than-life personality, and he'll be greatly missed.
Why was he the larger-than-life figure that could draw people in foreign lands from their homes, Jack?
He just had a way about him, a charisma. Almost the other politician I compare him to is Bill Clinton. They remembered everybody's name. When they walked into a room, they became the center of attention by just walking in. And so it's a quality, it's a gift that any other politician would love to have. And again, he had a way of relating to people. He had, I use the word, he empathized with people and their plight. And that, I think, was just something that he really believed in. And as the prior people were talking about, the summer jobs program. Many people in the city got their first job from Marion Barry. And think of all people are always going to be critical, but think of all the good he did. He and I were involved in building the Verizon Center, in building the Convention Center, in building the baseball stadium, in revitalizing downtown, in just bringing the city back from where it was. So he will be remembered and missed.
Councilman Evans, can you talk about Marion Barry's outsized role in the creation of an African-American middle class, and not just middle class, but upper middle class, through the hiring decisions and the contracting decisions he made, a very conscious effort to open doors to people who wouldn't have been shown the time of day, probably otherwise?
Oh, no question about it. And he's told me this, and if you have a chance to read his book, which I have read cover to cover, he'll explain in 1978 when he became mayor, it was very hard for an African-American to get a job. Certainly, the federal government was just opening up. Private sector was largely not available. And so Mayor Barry decided, I'm going to hire people, get them jobs, because that's, we all believe that. That's a fundamental right in America. If you have a job, you can do anything. And so he hired people, got them into the district government. People started making some money. They were able to buy houses. And I think he said one of things he didn't realize was going to happen. Everybody started moving out of the city, and so that was one of the things that happened. But he did, and through the contracting process, even to last week, when we are awarding contracts, he wants to make sure that disadvantaged businesses get a share of those contracts, because that's the only way we can open up America to everyone. And he was a champion for that. He was laser focused on it.
Jack Evans, member of the D.C. City Council, sharing his thoughts on the passing of Mayor for Life, Marion Barry. Mr. Evans, thank you very much for your time, sir. We appreciate it. Now, there's been so much talk throughout the morning about the legacy of Marion Barry, and one of the biggest ones you were talking about earlier and been discussed is the summer jobs program. This was something you were familiar with.
You can't, if you've been here 5 minutes, and certainly if you've known Marion Barry for 30-odd years, as I did, there's no overstating the impact this had. I was in church this morning, and the sermon was given by Reverend Susan Newman Moore, who was religious affairs advisor for former Mayor Anthony Williams. Guess she's a DC native, grew up in Adams Morgan. Guess how she got her first job? She got her first job through the DC Summer Jobs Program. She spoke about that with great pride and emotion, almost having to stop her sermon at one point. She's now an accomplished author and minister, extremely successful person, well known throughout the city. And as a journalist, one of the things I remember keenly, and this was brilliant, this showed the brilliance of Marion Barry. One year when they were having trouble getting the numbers, they had this policy where if you were a kid, you needed a summer job, you would get one. Well, of course, easier said than done. And they wanted as many private sector jobs as possible, and he felt like the private sector was being slow. So what did he do? He brought the cameras into his office. He they were positioned in front of his desk, and he got on the phone, and he started calling Heckinger, Pepka. I don't mean to call out people to suggest they weren't pulling their weight, but he started calling these different companies, and he'd say, hey, it's Marion Barry. I got these kids. They need jobs. What are you going to do for me?
A shrewd politician.
And successful.
Who knew exactly what he was doing.
And successful.
Yeah, very successful. And it's remarkable about how many lives this man touched. I mean, from the summer job program, City Hall, and a person joining us now who can really talk about that and just how much of an influence Marion Barry was on the lives of other people. Jim Graham, member of the D.C. City Council. Mr. Graham, we had the pleasure of speaking with you earlier today. Thank you for joining us once again. Your thoughts first off on the passing of Marion Barry.
Jim Graham, are you there? Oh,
Okay.
We'll get Jim Graham back. This gives me an opportunity to talk about something that was joked about often in the city, and Marion Barry was part of the joke. It was said that he was the ultimate situationalist. Now, what does that word mean? That word may have been invented to describe and talk about Marion Barry, and that meant when the politics of the day pointed him in one direction, he went in that direction, and if things changed, he would go in a very different direction. A case in point, Marion Barry becomes mayor for the very first time in part because of the support he got from the gay community. And he was very good to the gay community, and they were very loyal to him for quite a long time. But then when he was the councilman from Ward 8, where gay marriage wasn't polling nearly so well, he not only voted against same-sex marriage, he campaigned vigorously against it, appearing at a rally outside City Hall with ministers who were saying things that weren't just of the no, but of the hell no ilk. And so you could say, well, you know, how could this guy who was a pioneering supporter of gay rights at one point in his career do a 180 later in his career? And it's because, as we all would joke, and again, he was in on this joke, he was a situationalist. He did what the moment called for, particularly as it related to how it benefited him the most.
And it's amazing as you're talking about him, and so many people talking about Marion Barry, and just what a strong politician, what a strong leader he was, and how much he got done. I think for a lot of people, political watchers across the country, the idea that he would be reelected after his conviction was so puzzling to people across the country.
It was.
But I think for people in Washington, D.C., who knew of his power and his impact and his influence, it did make more sense, perhaps, than people who were watching the situation from across the country. Joined now by Kenyon McDuffie, member of the D.C. City Council. First of all, thank you very much for joining us, and we're sort of going through the list of reactions on the death of Mayor Barry, and just such an emotional day. Your reactions on the passing?
Well, I think like many people around the country, in particular in the District of Columbia, I was deeply saddened to hear of Marion Barry's passing. I heard you guys mention that there were a lot of people who were surprised when he won re-election after serving the prison sentence. Well, I was one, along with thousands in the District of Columbia, who weren't surprised because he had that uncanny ability to connect with people of all ages and stripes. A way to connect ordinary people to their government. And it's just, you know, as politicians, though, I have to tell you, Marion Barry was one of a kind.
Mr. McDuffie, when you're talking about, you know, we've talked a lot about the spirit and the kindness and the generosity of Mayor Barry today, but I want to talk, if you could shed a little bit of light in terms of as a negotiator and a shrewd politician. I mean, this, and we've heard it over and over, this was a man, he knew the budget backwards and forwards, knew the numbers, always did his homework. Maybe that is not getting a lot of attention today because there's so much focus on his spirit and his personality. What about him as just a politician and really a tough negotiator at City Hall?
You know, it's a great point. You know, he was a brilliant man. A lot of people don't know that he was only a few credits shy of getting a PhD in chemistry. So he brought all that he knew to his work. He would put people first. He was a champion for people and a shrewd negotiator, as you mentioned. I can recall having conversations with him, him asking me to come visit him in his office. And it always started out with just sort of a personal story, something that would connect us together. And then he would get down to brass tacks in the business, and we would talk about the things he wanted to accomplish. And I will tell you, I was proud to be able to have worked with him in 2013 to almost double the budget of the D.C. Office on Aging. He cared so much about seniors and youth and returning citizens. He and I worked so closely together on the ban-the-box legislation. He created a bill to institute a D.C. Commission on Fathers, Men, and Boys in the District of Columbia that I was proud to be able to identify funds to fund it for him. And so he was incredibly smart. He was a brilliant man. He was a shrewd negotiator and just a consummate, personable human being.
Let's see if we can keep Councilman McDuffie on the line and add to the conversation Ward 1 Councilman and the former head of the Whitman Walker Clinic, Jim Graham. Mr. Graham, thanks very much for calling in and spending part of your day helping us to put into some kind of historical perspective the life and legacy of Marion Barry. I mentioned that you were the executive director of the Whitman Walker Clinic at a very key time for the city and for this region. Can you talk about the Barry contribution in the area that I know meant so much to you and to this and to the needs that were so keen and you know, the dire
critical
situation that we faced?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Bruce. Yeah, well, at a time when so many people were walking away or were paralyzed or didn't know what to think and can I get this and so on, Marion never hesitated. He never hesitated. And he awarded, and I want to emphasize this, he awarded the first municipal aid services contract in the United States of America in August 1983. And I worked with him on that, and it wasn't easy. There were people saying, well, don't give it to Whitman Walker Clinic, give it to this, give it to that. And he said, no, these are the guys who are equipped to do the job, and he gave it to us. And it was at a time which was absolutely essential to have this money, and it was good for until September the 30th, so that $17,000 went a long ways. But I'm emotionally overwhelmed today because we have lost a huge chunk of our soul and our heart in District of Columbia. And there are those, you know, I know Marion has his demons. Who doesn't have their demons? You know, we all do of one kind or another. But he was so much the District of Columbia, and he will always be so much the District of Columbia. The past few years, when I was still chairing the Human Services Committee, he was an absolutely essential ally in doing what we were able to do for poor people. And we didn't do as much as we wanted to because we just couldn't get the votes all the time.
And you know, Councilman Graham and also Councilman McDuffie staying with us, there was nothing ran on time during the Barry years, in part because, you know, if there was a 2 o'clock event, part of it was he wasn't disciplined enough to get there by 2 o'clock. But
had people to talk to.
But part of it was
I don't agree with that.
No, but there's a part B. Hang on, Jim. There's a part B that I want to get to. Jim, hang on one second. There's a funny part B that you're going to agree with, and that is that the guy couldn't turn around without someone coming up to him and wanting to connect and knowing that he might be uniquely positioned to help them with whatever challenge they were facing. So I'm not trying to be mean to Marion Barry.
You're absolutely right.
It was a very complicated life that he led.
He never brushed anybody off.
Right.
He never brushed anybody off, and that's what made him so slow in getting places. Very often it was. And he always had a word for this one and that one. You know, he reminds me very much of the care with people that Earl Warren took when I clerked for him. You know, it was the same kind of thing. There was always a kind word. There was always an expression of interest to whomever he was speaking to. And Barry was exactly the same way. And so it made us frustrated at times, but I knew what he was doing most of the time. And so, not all the time. Well, nobody knows what anybody does all the time. But this is a real fighter for humanity. And his struggle for human rights, and you know, and the reason he identified with poor people is he was born dirt poor. He knew it. He was born without running water. He was born in a shed in Mississippi at a time when how were blacks treated in Mississippi 78 years ago. You know, he knew the agony of his race and of others who are vulnerable and unrepresented. So it came from his heart. It came from his life experience. It wasn't something he read in a book or a study.
Right.
And I think that's what made him so powerful.
And if I could, you know, having grown up in the city, having been a beneficiary of those summer jobs that Marion cared so much about, I would say there are a lot of strong political figures over the years in D.C., but Marion was the one household name in my neighborhood. Everybody knew Marion Barry. It was because he walked through our neighborhood. He came to our block parties. He was able to make sure that people had jobs, particularly our youth, which is why he was so endeared by so many people, because he could relate to everybody's plight. You know, he could relate to those folks regardless of where you lived in the District of Columbia. He knew your struggle. He lived your struggle. He can also offer the type of counsel and insight that just made him such a beloved person by so many people across the district.
Kenyon McDuffie and, Mr. McDuffie and Mr. Graham, thank you so much.
Could I just say one other thing? Because I heard Harry Yaffe say white people hate him. And, you know, that's just not true. That's just not true. Blacks hate him and whites hate him. Blacks love him and whites hate him. That's just not true. I mean, there's a lot of people in the district who have been here many years who are white, who think very highly of him, have deep respect for him. Just let me add that. Thank you.
Mr. Graham and Mr. McDuffie, again, thank you very much for your time, sharing your thoughts on the passing of Marion Barry and the legacy that will forever live in the District of Columbia. We want to continue our team coverage now with Kristen Holmes. She is live in the newsroom. She has been monitoring this situation on social media. This is what anybody is talking about in D.C. and certainly in the region. And Kristen actually recently interviewed Marion Barry about his autobiography and his legacy and his, following all the developments today. This is what people are talking about. Kristen, thank you very much for joining us. What was your sense when you spoke with Marion Barry recently, just about how he was doing, his spirits at the time you spoke with him?
It's actually funny that you say that, because I was listening to you guys with Harry Jaffe on the phone, and I was hearing him say the part about how the one thing that Marion Barry believed was that he should be in charge. And one of my favorite parts from the interview that I had forgotten about was I asked Marion Barry, how do you think Obama's doing? How do you think President Obama's doing? And he said, this isn't about Obama. This is about me. And I will tell you that I think that there hasn't been another mayor as good as me. So I thought that was a pretty compelling answer. And he was very at peace with his legacy. And earlier this morning, you asked the question of how the former mayor would be remembered. Would he be known for the scandals and for the personal problems that plagued his life? Or would he be revered for the direction he took the city and the programs he instituted? And while I can't answer to his long-term legacy, I can certainly say that right now on social media, people are mainly focusing on the positive impacts of the four-term mayor and encouraging others to do so as well. Reactions on Twitter range from politicians and public figures to members of the community, and I'm going to read a few of them to you. Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton tweets, I offer my condolences to the family and loved ones of the former mayor of the District of Columbia, Marion Barry. And D.C. Councilmember Tommy Wells says, I don't have the words that can express the full width and breadth of Marion's influence on our city, plus so many individuals, including me. And here, Mayor-elect Muriel Bowser, who you guys just got to talk to, tweets a statement that says, our thoughts and prayers go out to the family of Mayor Marion Barry. And then she has a statement that goes on to say, Marion Barry gave the voice to those who needed it most. The Reverend Jesse Jackson also weighed in on Marion Barry, saying he was a great coalition politician. He will remain high on the honor roll of freedom fighters, RIP. As well as D.C. soccer team DC United, and said DCU is saddened by the passing of Ward 8 council member, former Mayor Marion Barry, an iconic leader and unmatched champion for the district. In addition to giving these statements on Marion Barry, several of these leaders, including Mayor-elect Bowser and Councilwoman Anita Bonds, changed their photos to images of them with the former mayor. But for me, some of the most compelling reactions came from those who benefited from the programs Barry instituted as mayor. Here, Allison Finch Wilson says, without you, Marion Barry, I wouldn't have had my first teen job in the arts. I wouldn't have gotten into Duke Ellington. Thank you. And of course, Wilson is talking here about Barry's summer teen program, which we've talked about a lot in the top of this hour, that provided jobs and paid internships to thousands of the city's youth. And as you mentioned, I had the chance to sit down with Barry recently in one of his final interviews to discuss his memoir titled Mayor for Life, a nickname Barry was well known for. And we talked about the jobs program as well as several others he started while in office.
It's also one of giving back to the community, demonstrating you got to give back. And I've done a incredible job in Washington, D.C. When I came here in '65, it was a sleepy southern town. Because of my policies on working with developers, etc., look at downtown now. Look at our neighborhoods. Look at 14th Street, which is burnt out when I came into office. And I could name, look at Georgetown, look at Washington Harbor, look at the Verizon Center, airports in that building. Our new convention center, $800 million center. It was my idea, and etc. I could name countless things about our seniors, about our young people. Over 100,000 young people went through my summer job program. They remember it. When I was growing up, I had to carry both papers in the morning, an evening paper, sell rags, sell pop bottles, any way to make an honest dollar. And I swore then, whoever ever got the opportunity to help young people, I was going to do it.
And to answer your original question during this interview, the former mayor was relaxed. As I said earlier, he was a man at peace with his legacy, telling me he no longer held any grudges or placed any blame. This book was his last word on his life story. And Jeff, we will be continuing to follow social media and sharing reactions as people learn the news of Marion Barry's passing. From the newsroom, Kristen Holmes, News Channel 8.
Kristen, thank you very much. We appreciate it. We now have the pleasure and honor of being joined by Phil Mendelson, chair of the D.C. City Council. Mr. Mendelson, thank you very much for coming in and joining us on set. Your thoughts on this day, sir?
Well, it was a real shock. Folks knew that Marion's health had been declining. He was in the hospital this past week, but nobody thought it was serious, and apparently it wasn't serious. So this was a real shock to folks. And of course, what it does is it forces all of us to step back and take a look at this man who was an iconic figure in Washington, the politics and the culture of the city.
We knew the public Marion Barry, and some of us got to know a little bit about the private and personal Marion Barry, but you served with him. So you were in those small meetings. You had those interactions away from the public, the press, and the spotlight. Tell us something that we don't know or fully appreciate about. I mean, one of my favorite Marion Barry lines is when he's grilling I think it was during a lottery controversy, and there's a tussle, and he says, "Well, what's in this for me?" He just blurts it right out in public. What's in this for me? And I've been using that line ever since because I love it so much. Give us a sense of what it was like to be with and to negotiate with, if that was the situation, Marion Barry.
Well, you know, I'm not sure there was much difference between the public Marion Barry and the private Marion Barry. He cared very deeply about issues. Particularly those affecting poor, the lost, the last, and the least, as he often said. And so those conversations occurred in private as well as in public. You know, sometimes he would say things that maybe got him in trouble, but maybe he was just speaking candidly. And you know, as one has been in politics long enough, they realize that they can be a little bit more comfortable with being candid, and that was surely part of Marion as well.
What did he teach you as a politician? I mean, his success is tremendous.
A few things. I think he taught every council member something, and then a lot of other folks as well. I mean, one thing was that Marion was remarkable for his ability to deal with criticism and to reach out. You know, I was thinking earlier about, I mean, this was just, in my view, legend, that particularly when he was mayor in the 80s and people would protest him and they'd march on his house and he'd come out and join them in the march. Because, you know, rather than do what most of us would do, in fact, what most anybody would do, which is to kind of run from, hide from, or be angry at the criticism, he realized that folks have views on issues, and you reach out to them and you don't hold it against them, and you don't make the tension worse. You try to bridge those differences, and he did that.
And his struggle in public with all the well-known demons sort of offered an opportunity for others to be inspired by that. Not that his battles were 100% successful, clearly no, but this was a man who was living all of his life very publicly, and as Jim Graham said, we're all wrestling with something or multiple things.
That's true, and it's to Marion's credit that rather than pretend that he was better, he would just simply own up to his faults and say that, you know, we all are troubled, just as you said, and own up to it and apologize. And that, I mean, that's just a reality about all of us. And what some of us who are elected to office do is we try to pretend that we don't have these demons.
I think, but one more question for you, Mr. Mendelson, is that when you look at his life story, and it's just the ultimate comeback story, whatever the roadblock was, he got back up and he kept persevering. The tenacity of Marion Barry, is it something that you saw in him, perhaps, if you would talk about that really, at least from my very limited impression, seems like no other, or few others that have that sort of tenacity?
Well, it's tenacity, but it's also the fact that you know, on the local level, politics is local, and he had connections with people. When I say connections, on a personal level, he would meet folks who didn't know him, and he would connect with them. And of course, having been active one way or another in the city for 50 years, there were a lot of folks whom he'd already had interaction with, and they knew him. There was a connection there, and that is what made him so popular and made it possible for him to stay active in our life.
Phil Mendelson, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thanks very much for being here.
Yeah, we appreciate you being here. Chair of the D.C. City Council sharing his thoughts on Marion Barry. We're going to take a very quick break from the coverage, and we're going to look at the weather. Dave Zarin joining us now. Dave, some moisture, some rain coming on the way, and travel could be a little dicey later this week, huh?
Absolutely. A big travel week coming up, and yes, problematic weather possible on Wednesday. It looks like today, though, instead of being in the depth of winter, it finally feels like fall out there. Let's take you out to Rockville, and you see the temperature is 47 degrees out there, and that is about where we should be for this time of year. We're going to add another 5 to 10 degrees this afternoon. You can see the skies out there in Laurel, Maryland, some filtered sunshine out there, and one of the warmer spots down in Alexandria, already 52 degrees, and we should be at 55 for this time of year. Let's look at the headlines. Yes, as Jeff was saying, some rain coming in, I think, after sunset, and then lingering into tomorrow morning till about 10 o'clock. But tomorrow, you're going to like, because the mercury up near 70 degrees could be the warmest day this month of November. Right now, it was back on the 11th when we hit 71. And yes, a wintry mix coming on the worst possible day. Yes, the peak travel day before Thanksgiving, we could have what I think right now is a cold rain. North and west, it could come down as a mixture of rain and snow, so be advised of that. Here you can see the temperatures right now 51 at Reagan National Airport. Those temperatures are milder by about 5 to 10 degrees from yesterday, so you don't have to have that heavy jacket. So 55 to 58 today, and then tomorrow, Jeff, temperature around 70, then a tough day maybe on Wednesday.
Thanks, Dave. Going to be an interesting week weather-wise. Continuing our coverage now on the death of Marion Barry, we do have a statement from President Obama issued not too long ago. The president saying, Michelle and I were saddened to hear of the passing of Marion Barry. Marion was born a sharecropper's son, came of age during the civil rights movement, and became a fixture in D.C. politics for decades. As a leader with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Marion helped advance the cause of civil rights for all. During his decades in elected office in D.C., he put in place historic programs to lift working people out of poverty, expand opportunity, and begin to make real the promise of home rule. Through a storied, at times tumultuous life and career, he earned the love and respect of countless Washingtonians, and Michelle and I extend our deepest sympathies to Marion's family, friends, and constituents today. That's President Obama's statement on the passing of Marion Barry. Joined now by Mike Canine, News Channel 8. Mike, you and I spoke earlier today. You were with the mayor recently, and you had some really interesting thoughts about your perception of how he was doing and his spirits the last time you saw him. Tell us a little about that.
I saw the former mayor and Ward 8 council member on Tuesday. I was covering that vote at the legislative hearing, or meeting rather, on that snow shoveling law, which Mayor Barry was one of the 3 who voted against that. Now, this was just a couple of days before the mayor was sent to the hospital. He looked tired, frail, more frail than I've seen him before at the council. I interviewed the former mayor outside the D.C. council chamber that afternoon on Tuesday. He was seated on a bench there in the hallway on the 5th floor of the Wilson building, talking with different Washingtonians. And as I asked him questions about my story that day, about that legislation on the winter snow removal from sidewalks, which he voted against, he seemed to struggle to find his words. He seemed to lack his usual energy. The 78-year-old, of course, has faced many health challenges in recent years. A survivor of prostate cancer, he has diabetes, had diabetes. In 2009, received a kidney transplant, and earlier this year, a serious blood infection resulted in 2 lengthy hospital stays. So his stay at the hospital this week was not shocking, but his age and declining health really became clear in recent years as the former 4-term mayor, now council member, really slowly hobbled around the council chamber to the dais. Once he sat down in that chair, though, representing Ward 8, he was as fired up, flamboyant as ever. But Thursday night, his spokesperson, LaToya Foster, said Barry was admitted to Howard University Hospital. At the time, she emphasized that he just wasn't feeling well. He was feeling a little under the weather. He was resting comfortably following doctor's orders. And we still don't know exactly what the official diagnosis was, what the problem was that led him to go to the hospital, or what caused his death. And I would add that while we're all surprised by his sudden death overnight, I think his staff, his friends, and family members were shocked more than anyone, because, as Foster emphasized, Barry was okay, and she had seen him in far worse condition than this past week. In his council office this week at the Wilson building, it was business as usual. And Foster also noted that Barry was looking forward to seeing his interview with Oprah Winfrey this weekend on her own series, Where Are They Now?, You just saw a clip of that preview where she asked him about his drug history and that infamous videotape of his arrest at the Vista Hotel. Foster also emphasized that he was looking forward to Tuesday's event, his annual turkey giveaway, and organizers of that event say that it would go on, the show would go on as planned, and that Berry might even try to attend it, even though he was currently in the hospital at the time. And that's how convinced everyone was that once again this man would rebound from another health struggle. And now, even after his death, organizers saying that event will go on now as a celebration of his life and legacy.
I talked with Berry spokeswoman LaToya Foster yesterday, and she told me that he was going to be released. He would be released soon, suggesting, of course, that whatever led to him not feeling so good and checking himself in the first place had, I guess, resolved itself, and that she would get back to me presumably within a couple hours' time to say that he was, in fact, out of the hospital. So, to your point, Mike, I think this is a shock. This was going to be one of those moments where you're like, oh my God, it was something you both knew was coming with 100% certainty, because it's one of the few things we all have in common is that the clock is ticking on all of us. But the moment is really mind-blowing.
I know that we're sort of running out of time here. Mike and Bruce was talking earlier about his time in speaking with Marion Berry and being able to speak with him. Do you have any impressions of personally what it was like to speak with him? Any memories?
My first interview with Marion Berry, it was on a holiday weekend. I'm not sure, I think it may have been Veterans Day weekend, but for some reason I had to go to his house and interview him on a totally unrelated topic. And he may have been coming from church or some meeting where he was wearing a suit and tie, and it was just before the 2008 election, and he invited me inside his house, and I'm brand new to Washington, and he goes upstairs for 10 minutes, leaves me alone in his living room, comes back down, head to toe covered in Obama gear. And he was a lifelong, hardcore Democrat. He loved his party, he loved the president, he loved serving his people in Ward 8 and serving the city. And he did it through all of these health challenges, through some of his own personal struggles and flaws. But he loved this city and he loved the people here.
And for the most, for the most part, they loved him back. I mean, you'll just never encounter a political comeback like the one that we saw in the early 90s when Berry is caught on that video, goes to prison, comes back, becomes councilman and mayor again. We'll never see, I suspect, anything like that ever again.
And it's just remarkable as we take a look back, as thinking about this hour and all the people we've spoken with, and just I think that some of these terms, larger than life, never one of a kind, these terms are often overused, but you listen to people, that was Marion Berry, and the legacy in the city is forever.
And credit City Paper, credit Washington City Paper with conjuring up and then using that moniker, Mayor for Life. He embraced it.
And of course embraced it, right? I mean, of course, Marion Berry said, I am the Mayor for Life.
At the time, I think part of the notion was that the city would never be, I shouldn't speak for others, but I think part of the notion was that that the city would never be smart enough to pick someone else. But push all that aside.
And it's very easy, I think, for people outside the Beltway to be dismissive of Marion Berry and the voters who supported him. But if you live in Ward 8, if you live in this city, you understand the struggle for representation, this race struggle that he gave those folks a voice.
Mike Cunneen, Bruce DePort, thank you very much. We want to thank you for joining this, a look back at the life of 78-year-old Marion Berry, who died this morning. Stick with News Channel 8 and WJLA as we continue to follow this story throughout the day. Thank you for joining us.